Welcome to the podcast from St. Barnabas Lutheran Church in Cary, Illinois. I'm Pastor Sarah Wilson, and we'll be posting gospel lessons and a sermon for you to enjoy each week.
The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 2nd chapter. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The Gospel of the Lord. So join me in a prayer as we center ourselves, if you would. God, we thank you for your word, for your guidance, for your direction. Open our hearts and our minds to you. Give us what we need. Amen. So several years ago, my husband and I went out to breakfast, and we ran into Steve and his wife. Now, Steve is really just barely an acquaintance for me. My husband knows him better than I do, but I think we would both consider Steve more of an acquaintance than a friend. But here's what happens when you are pastors. People will open up to you about anything that's going on in their lives because they have this feeling and this hope that you are a safe place for them to do that with, if that makes any sense. Usually for me, it's been in the dairy aisle of Jewel for whatever reason. If you ever see me in Jewel, you'll see me go through the dairy aisle super quick so that, because sometimes it's hard to talk about your chemo treatments in the middle of the dairy aisle. It's just a little awkward. But anyway, it's good. It's all good. Whether it's the dairy aisle or the restaurant in the morning, we ran into Steve and his wife. And for some reason, very quickly, we got into the topic of his dad, who had passed away several years prior to that. And Steve told us that for the whole first year after his dad's death, he walked around in a fog. Like, just kind of confused. He had a hard time, concentrating. He had a hard time seeing beyond just his grief and his sorrow. He was just caught up in that grief so much, it was like a thick cloud had descended over him, and he was living in this fog of a life. And he said, but after about a year of that, suddenly it just lifted, and I could go on with life. I guess I was just done with that grieving. Now, you don't have to lose somebody that you love in order to experience that kind of grief and that fog, right? I mean, we can experience it because of depression, or because of a big change in our lives, or because, I don't know, just an illness or whatever. It can just descend on us, and it's so hard to move forward. So I was thinking about that as I was reading our first lesson for today from the prophet Isaiah, because he was writing to people who found themselves enveloped in a thick fog and they could not move forward. So when people ask me, or they say to me, it's really hard to read the Bible. I just really never have because it's so confusing to me. And I say, yeah, it is. It is. So start with the Gospels, because that Old Testament is really hard. And there are really boring parts in it too. And it's just like it will wear you down. Unless you read the Psalms, which are really great because they're poetry and it's emotions and you can connect with that and they're good. But the history is rough. So I'm going to give you like my 2-minute summary of the history of the Old Testament. And it pretty much summarizes like chapters and chapters and chapters. The confirmation kids, we just finished the Old Testament, so you can make sure to keep me on track with this, okay? And tell me if I get it wrong, all right? So here's the history. God tells the people how to live, and they live like that for a while, and then they decide they can do it better, and so they decide to do it their own way, which is never the right way, and they get in trouble because they make bad choices, and then they suffer the consequences of their actions, which usually means that they're conquered by a neighboring nation. It could be the Assyrians, or remember your favorite one, guys? The Babylonians, that's what they called it. The Babylonians. Or the Babylonians, they called them. It's the Babylonians. Eventually they get conquered by the Romans, right? And that's where we are when Jesus is born. But this is what happens over and over and over. And God sends prophets to try to explain to the people how to live right and to explain to them what's going to happen when they mess up. And come on, people, let's do this. And that's what Isaiah is all about. In fact, like 50 to 60 chapters worth of please do it right, or this is going to happen over and over and over. That's pretty much the Old Testament. I mean, not that we've really advanced much since then, right? I mean, am I right here? Like, we still keep messing up over and over despite our efforts. So Isaiah and the other prophets were sent to explain to people how to live right and to warn them against making bad choices. But Isaiah also wrote to give the people hope. Because after living for so long and experiencing the consequences of your bad choices, you start to feel like you're living in fog. Or sometimes you're just enveloped by life that happens that isn't great, right? And you feel like you're enveloped in that fog. And Isaiah also spoke hope to those people. And so he says things like, get up, shine. Here is some light in that darkness that you are experiencing. And he tells them that their families will be reunited, gathered back together. He tells them that they'll eventually be able to hear again and to see where they're being led. He tells them to rejoice, to feel something other than the despair and the sorrow and the frustration and all that negative stuff that they've experienced. You will have joy. We're really no different than those Israelites, are we? We need that encouragement too. And we're also called to be an encouragement to others who are living in that fog. it's funny, thousands of years, and yet we still haven't changed. The difference is, of course, that we have Jesus to strengthen us and to bring us those gifts that we need. May we have the strength to hear what we need to hear and to be who we need to be. Amen.
Thanks for listening today. We hope this message helped bring you closer to God in a new way. You can learn more about our church at www.stbarnabas-cary.com or visit us in person at 8901 Cary Algonquin Road in Cary, Illinois. Our worship services are each Sunday at 8 and 10:30 a.m. God's blessings on your week.